Useless old woman. Aren't you going to make lunch? Briella's sharp voice sliced through the air, freezing every conversation in the room. All eyes turned toward me, some amused, some awkward, but all watching. I felt my cheeks burn as I stood there holding a pitcher of water right in the doorway of what used to be my own dining room. The only sound was the soft clinking of silverware being set down. My son, Marcus, cleared his throat but said nothing. He never said anything when his wife spoke to me like that. "I'm sorry," I whispered, barely loud enough to hear. "The roast needs 10 more minutes." Briella waved a perfectly manicured hand, the same one wearing the diamond bracelet I'd given her last year, the one that cost me 3 months of my pension. 10 more minutes? Our guests have already waited an hour. You really can't handle something this simple? I wanted to remind her she'd invited 8 extra guests last minute, that I'd been cooking since dawn despite the pain in my hands. But I stayed quiet. I'd learned by now that speaking up only made it worse. "Mom's getting slower these days," Marcus joked, not even looking at me. "You know how it is with older folks." Older folks. I'm 60, not 90. I raised 3 children, ran a household, and somehow became invisible in the process. I went back to the kitchen, my safe place, even though it wasn't really mine anymore. Ever since Marcus and Briella moved in 3 years ago after their business failed, my home had slowly stopped being mine. The master bedroom went first, then the office, then every part of the house, until all I had left was a small guest room in the back, Marcus's old room when he was a boy. The roast was ready. It had been for 20 minutes, but I needed those extra minutes to steady myself. My hands were trembling. I couldn't let them see me cry, not again. From the dining room came laughter, Briella's voice, bright and confident, telling stories about how she saved Marcus's career. She never mentioned how their business had failed or how they'd burned through their savings. I arranged the roast with vegetables, just like my mother taught me. It looked perfect, beautiful, like everything I used to take pride in. When I brought the platter out, Briella clapped her hands. "Finally! I was starting to think we'd have to order pizza." More polite laughter followed. I served everyone in silence. When I reached her plate, she glanced up at me and said loudly, "The meat looks dry, and the vegetables? Overcooked. How do you ruin something this simple, Nellie?" Something inside my chest cracked. The roast was perfect. I knew it was. "I'm sorry," I said again, the only words I ever seemed allowed to say. "Just put it down and bring me the grilled chicken from yesterday," she said with a fake smile. At least that was edible. But there was no leftover chicken. She just wanted to send me away to show everyone who was in charge. I set the platter down and turned toward the kitchen, my face hot with shame. Then I heard its ceramic scraping against wood. A crash. Her plate hit the floor, food splattering across the hardwood. "Oh no!" Briella gasped dramatically. "Look what happened, Nellie. You'd better clean this up right away before it stains." I stared at the mess on the floor, the food scattered across the same hardwood my late husband had installed with his own hands 30 years ago. Everyone was watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. Some faces showed pity, others looked away in discomfort. A few of the younger guests were even trying not to laugh. "Clean it up," Briella repeated, her voice sharper now. "We can't eat with this mess on the floor." So I got down on my hands and knees in front of 12 people and began picking up the food with my bare hands. The gravy had already begun to seep between the floorboards. I could feel Briella's gaze on me, heavy, satisfied, watching as a 60-year-old woman crawled on the floor like a servant in her own home. "Poor thing," someone whispered softly, but not loud enough for Marcus to hear, not loud enough to matter. As I wiped away the last trace of gravy, something inside me shifted. It wasn't the usual dull acceptance I'd grown used to. It was something else, something that had been asleep for a long, long time. I excused myself, murmuring something about checking on dessert, but instead of going to the kitchen, I walked straight to my small bedroom and closed the door behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me felt like a stranger, gray hair pulled into a bun, tired eyes, shoulders curved from years of bowing to everyone else's will. When had I become this person? When had I agreed to disappear? I opened my dresser and pulled out the bottom drawer. Beneath a stack of old sweaters, my fingers touched what I was looking for, a slim leather folder. I hadn't opened it in 3 years, not since Marcus and Briella moved in, and I'd decided to let them think I was just a helpless older woman living off her pension. Inside were documents they had never seen, bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios, corporate records, all bearing one name, Nellie R. Harrison, CEO and majority shareholder of Harrison Holdings, LLC. I traced the embossed letters at the top of the most recent quarterly report, $47 million in assets, 12 commercial properties, 3 apartment complexes, 1 mid-sized office building downtown, a building that happened to house the very same marketing firm where Briella had just started working last month. For 3 years, I'd let them treat me like a burden. I'd watched my daughter-in-law insult me, belittle me, dismiss me, all while she worked in a building that I owned. The company that signed her paycheck sent me rent every single month. I closed the folder carefully and slid it back under the sweaters. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow, Briella would go to work, expecting another ordinary day, while the useless old woman stayed home cleaning her floors. But tomorrow, everything was going to change. I woke up at 5:30, as I had for 40 years. But this morning, the air felt different. The house was still, the world outside quiet. Marcus and Briella wouldn't be awake for hours. I brewed my coffee in the same kitchen where I'd been humiliated 2 days earlier. The faint stain on the floor was still there, a reminder of how far I'd let things go. But as I sipped my coffee, I wasn't thinking about the stain. I was thinking about the phone call I needed to make. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrison." James Peterson's voice was crisp, steady. Even at 6 in the morning, he'd been my property manager for 15 years, one of the few people who truly knew who I was. "How can I help you?" he asked. "I need you to prepare a termination notice," I said quietly, "for Briella Richardson at Meridian Marketing, effective immediately." There was a short pause. "May I ask the reason?" "Misconduct, unprofessional behavior," I replied. "Use whatever standard language fits someone who's proven unsuitable for the workplace." "I'll have it ready within the hour. Should I alert building security?" "Yes," I said. "And James, I'd like to handle this personally." Another pause. "Of course, Mrs. Harrison. Will you be coming in today?" "I'll be there at 9. I hung up and watched the dawn light spill across the counter. Upstairs, the shower started running. Briella getting ready for another big day at her prestigious job. She'd been so proud when she got it, so proud of her office, her salary, her title. She had no idea that every dollar she earned came from the rent her company paid me. For 3 years, she'd called me useless, while building her career inside my walls, powered by my electricity, beneath a roof I owned. Every insult, every dismissive laugh, every moment she made me feel small, I remembered them all. At 7:30, I heard their voices in the kitchen, and I smiled. Briella's voice carried through the house, sharp and commanding as always. "Where's breakfast? I have an important client meeting this morning. I can't be late." I heard Marcus mumble something about cereal. "Cereal? Are you kidding me? Doesn't your mother cook anymore, or has she completely given up?" I waited 5 minutes before stepping into the kitchen, wearing my old bathrobe and slippers, perfect for the role I'd mastered over the past 3 years. The quiet, forgetful woman who seemed too tired to keep up with the world. "Good morning," I said softly, eyes lowered. Briella barely looked up from her phone. "Finally. I need eggs Benedict and fresh fruit, and make sure the hollandaise isn't lumpy like last time." "I'm not sure we have all the ingredients," I began carefully. "Then figure it out," she snapped. "That's what grocery stores are for, isn't it?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably but stayed silent, like always. He had learned that silence was easier than standing up for anyone, especially me. I nodded meekly and opened cabinets, pretending to check for ingredients I already knew we didn't have. Briella sighed dramatically. "This is ridiculous. I'll just grab something on the way to work. I don't know why I even bother expecting basic consideration in this house." Her heels clicked against the floor as she stormed out, Marcus following close behind. When the door finally shut, the house fell quiet again. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the silence. Then I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, behind dresses I hadn't worn in years, hung 3 business suits, navy, charcoal, and black. I pulled out the navy one and laid it across the bed. It had been 3 years since I'd worn it. 3 years since I'd stepped foot inside Harrison Holdings. My employees believed I was on an extended medical leave. Only James knew the truth, that I'd wanted to disappear for a while, to see what it felt like to live as someone invisible. Now I knew. It felt like drowning in plain sight. The suit still fit perfectly. I'd kept my figure, not out of vanity, but from years of restless energy and housework that never ended. As I looked in the mirror, the transformation was almost startling. The weary woman in the bathrobe was gone, replaced by someone I recognized, someone who carried authority. I applied a touch of makeup, nothing heavy, just enough to bring back the sharp cheekbones I'd inherited from my grandmother, and the steel-gray eyes that once made boardroom rivals look away first. I pulled my hair into a neat twist and fastened my grandmother's pearl earrings. On my wrist I placed her old watch. The woman in the mirror was 60, but she looked like someone who still commanded respect, someone who built legacies, not someone who cleaned up other people's messes. At 8:45, I drove downtown to the Harrison building, my building. The parking attendant did a double take as I pulled into my old reserved space. N. Harrison, President. The paint was faded, but the words still carried weight. "Mrs. Harrison," Carlos said, surprised. "We weren't expecting you today." "I know, Carlos," I replied with a smile. "Is my office ready?" "Always, ma'am. Mr. Peterson made sure everything stayed exactly as you left it." The elevator ride to the top floor felt both familiar and foreign. When the doors opened, the scent of polished mahogany and fresh coffee greeted me. My office hadn't changed, large windows overlooking the city I'd helped shape over 2 decades. James was waiting near my desk, a folder in hand. "The termination notice is ready," he said, setting it down gently. "Building security's been informed. Ms. Richardson should be arriving within the next 10 minutes. I took the pen, steady and sure, and signed my full name, Eleanor Nellie Rose Harrison, CEO. It felt good to write it again, to be it again. For years I'd been introduced as Marcus's mother, or the old lady they live with. But that was never who I really was. "There's something else," James said carefully. "Ms. Richardson has been vocal about her personal life. She's told colleagues she's stuck taking care of her husband's helpless mother, someone who, in her words, can barely function." I felt that familiar ache in my chest, but this time it wasn't breaking me, it was setting something free. "She also mentioned that she and your son are planning to convince you to move into assisted living," he added quietly. "She said the house is too much for you to maintain. My house. The home my husband and I built 30 years ago. The home where I raised my children. The home I'd paid off twice through the company I built from nothing." "Thank you, James," I said calmly. "No need to escort her out." I stood, smoothed my skirt, and glanced toward the glass doors. "I'll handle this myself. I'll handle this myself." Through my office window, I could see the glass-fronted Meridian Marketing Suite across the atrium, and there she was, Briella, stepping off the elevator, coffee in hand, chatting with a coworker like she owned the place. She was wearing a designer suit I'd never seen before, probably bought with her first paycheck, the one she'd earned working in my building. I picked up the termination notice and walked to the elevator. It was time for Briella to learn who the useless old woman in her house really was. It was time for her to meet the real Nellie Harrison. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime as I reached the 15th floor. Through Meridian's glass doors, I saw Briella at her desk, her polished nails clicking against the keyboard, a small smile tugging at her lips as she typed. She laughed at something on her screen, probably another story about the crazy old lady she lived with. I straightened my shoulders and walked into the reception area. The young woman at the front desk looked up, offering a polite smile that faltered slightly when she couldn't place me. "Good morning," I said evenly. "I'm here to see Briella Richardson." "Of course," the receptionist replied. "May I tell her who's calling?" "Eleanor Harrison. She'll know who I am." She picked up the phone, and I watched through the glass partition as Briella answered. Her expression changed in an instant, curiosity melting into shock. She turned in her chair, scanning the lobby until her eyes met mine. The color drained from her face. She stood, hesitating, every trace of her usual confidence slipping away. Her steps slowed as she walked toward me, like someone moving through a dream they didn't understand. "Nellie? What are you doing here? How did you—" Her voice trailed off as she glanced around, suddenly aware of curious eyes on us. "I think we need to talk," I said calmly. "In private. I'm in the middle of something important. Maybe we can talk at home." "No, Briella," I interrupted gently. "We'll talk now, in your office." Something in my tone, steady, unshakable, made her step back. For the first time in 3 years, I saw fear in her eyes. She nodded, wordless, and led me through a maze of cubicles. I could feel the weight of every gaze following us, coworkers whispering, wondering who this composed stranger was and why their usually confident colleague looked like she'd seen a ghost. Briella's office was exactly as she'd described: large windows, sleek furniture, a skyline view. She closed the door and turned to face me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Nellie, I don't understand. How did you even get here? Did Marcus drive you? And why are you dressed like—" She gestured vaguely at my navy suit. "Sit down, Briella." I really can't. I'm in the middle of—" "Sit," I repeated, calm but firm. This time she obeyed. I remained standing, positioning myself between her and the door. The power in the room had shifted completely, and she knew it. "Do you like your office?" I asked casually. She blinked. "What?" "Your office," I said again. "It's quite nice. Corner window, great view, impressive for someone who's only been here a month." "Yes, it's very nice," she stammered. "Nellie, what is this about? You're scaring me." "Am I?" I walked to the window, resting a hand on the glass. The city stretched below, just as it had for decades. You know, I've always loved this view. I used to stand at windows like this one while making decisions that affected hundreds of people. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she said weakly. I turned to face her. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other, the woman who'd spent years tearing me down, and the woman she never truly knew. "Tell me about your job, Briella," I said. "You were so proud when you got it. Starting salary of $85,000, full benefits, corner office, quite a step up from your last position." Her eyes widened. "How do you know my salary?" "I know a lot of things," I said softly. "I know you told your friends at the gym that you finally escaped the dead weight of living with an old woman who contributes nothing. I know you've been looking at apartments, planning to convince Marcus to move me into a care facility so you can have the house to yourselves. I know you told your sister that dealing with me is like raising a child who never grew up." Her face drained of color again. "Who told you that? Have you been spying on me?" I smiled faintly. "I don't need to spy. People talk. And when you treat someone as invisible as you've treated me, you forget that invisible people still see everything." I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a document on her desk. Her eyes flicked down, then froze. What is that?" "Your termination notice," I said evenly, "effective immediately." "You can't, what? You can't fire me," she sputtered. "You don't work here. You don't even understand how any of this works." "This is insane," Briella whispered, her voice trembling. I sat down across from her desk, crossing my legs calmly and folding my hands in my lap. "Read the letterhead," I said. Her fingers shook as she lifted the document. Her eyes scanned the top of the page, and I saw the exact moment realization began to dawn. "Harrison Holdings, LLC," she read aloud, voice cracking. "That's right. But that's the company that owns this building. They're our landlord." "Indeed, they are." She looked up at me, confusion and fear twisting together on her face. Nellie, what does this have to do with anything? Why do you even have their letterhead? Look at this signature line. Her eyes dropped back to the paper, and then I saw it. The instant she understood. Her hands began to tremble so violently that the page rustled. Eleanor R. Harrison, she read softly, her lips barely moving. Chief Executive Officer. That's me, Briella, I said quietly. Eleanor Rose Harrison. Nellie is just what my family used to call me, before I became the useless old woman who couldn't even cook your breakfast properly. She stared at me like I had just told her I was from another planet. That's impossible, she stammered. You live in our guest room, you clip coupons, you can't even figure out how to use the TV remote. I clip coupons because I've always been careful with money, I replied evenly. That's how wealth is built, Briella, and as for the remote, I smiled faintly. It was easier to let you believe I was helpless than to argue over what to watch every night. She set the paper down, her hands still shaking. This has to be some kind of joke. Marcus would have told me if you owned. Marcus doesn't know, I interrupted. He thinks I'm living on Social Security and his father's life insurance. He thinks I'm a burden, one you've both been kind enough to carry. But the bills, she said quickly, the groceries, the mortgage, you're always so worried about money you count every penny. No, Briella, I said, leaning forward. I count every penny because I know the value of money. I've never been worried about it. I have more than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Her breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling rapidly. I don't believe you. This is crazy. You're having some kind of breakdown. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. With one tap, I called James. James, I said when he answered, could you please confirm for our guest that Eleanor Harrison is the CEO and majority owner of Harrison Holdings? Yes, she's right here. I handed the phone to Briella. She took it as though it might bite her. Hello? She whispered. I couldn't hear James's side of the conversation, but I didn't need to. I just watched her face crumble, her color fading with every word. After about 30 seconds, she handed the phone back without saying a word. Thank you, James, I said into the receiver. Please have security escort Ms. Richardson out of the building. She'll need to collect her personal belongings. When I ended the call, Briella was staring down at her lap. I don't understand, she whispered. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us treat you like... Like what, Briella? I asked quietly. Like a servant? Like a burden? Like someone whose feelings didn't matter? She flinched. I wanted to see who you really were, I continued. I wanted to see what kind of person my son had married. What kind of people would move into my home and treat me like I was invisible. We didn't know, she said weakly. You didn't know, I corrected, because you didn't care to know. You saw what you wanted to see. You wanted to believe I was pathetic, so you could feel superior. A knock interrupted us. 2 security officers stood in the doorway, drawing curious glances from across the office. You have 15 minutes to collect your things, I said, standing. James will handle your final paycheck and the end of your benefits. Nellie, please, we can talk about this. I know I haven't been perfect, but no, I said firmly. We won't talk about this, and you haven't been imperfect, Briella. You've been cruel. I walked to the door, then turned back to her one last time. Oh, Briella, I said softly, this is just the beginning. You have no idea how much power I actually have, or how deeply your actions have affected your future. I left her sitting there, staring at the termination notice. Behind me, whispers were already spreading through the office. Phones buzzed. The story was out, and it would travel fast. But this was only the first move in a much larger game. At 2:30 that afternoon, the front door opened hard enough to rattle the hinges. I was in the living room, arranging a vase of fresh white roses. Briella stood in the doorway, still in her designer suit, but everything else about her was undone. Her hair was a mess, her makeup streaked, her eyes red and puffy. We need to talk, she said hoarsely. I kept trimming the stems. Do we? Don't play games with me, Nellie. Not anymore. I looked up, studying her. She seemed smaller somehow, like the weight of her new reality had crushed the confidence right out of her. "I'm not playing games, Briella," I said quietly. "I'm arranging flowers. In my home." The emphasis wasn't lost on her. She flinched and took a step back. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why let us believe you were poor and helpless, dependent on us?" I set the scissors down and looked her straight in the eye. "Because I wanted to see who you'd become when you thought I had no power," I said. "And you showed me, didn't you?" She sank onto the couch without being invited, a guest at last, in a house she never truly owned. Briella's legs seemed to give out beneath her. She sank onto the couch, her voice trembling. "I lost my job today," she said. "They escorted me out like I was some kind of criminal. Everyone was staring, whispering. It was humiliating." "Was it?" I asked, picking up another rose and examining it carefully. "Imagine," I continued softly, "how humiliating it must be to have someone throw food on the floor and tell you to clean it up on your hands and knees in front of 12 people. "That was different," she said quickly. "How?" I asked without looking up. "You were frustrated? You'd been planning that dinner for weeks, so you decided to take it out on the woman who had been cooking since dawn because you invited extra guests at the last minute?" I placed the rose in the vase with deliberate precision. "Tell me, Briella, what exactly was different about your humiliation today and mine 2 days ago?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she seemed to understand there was no good answer. "I tried calling Marcus," she said finally. "He won't answer his phone." "He's in a meeting," I replied. "I imagine he's explaining to his business partners why his wife was dismissed from her position for misconduct." Her face went pale. You didn't tell them it was misconduct. You can't prove that." "Actually," I said evenly, "I can." Her eyes widened. "Would you like to see the footage from the elevator last week?" I asked. "The one where you told your friend that you planned to convince Marcus to put me in a care facility? Or maybe the recording from the parking garage where you told your sister that living with me was like babysitting a senile child?" Briella's hands flew to her mouth. "You've been recording us?" "I own the building where you worked," I said calmly. "Security cameras are standard, and voices carry in parking garages." Tears streamed down her face, dark streaks of mascara marking her cheeks. "This is insane. You're destroying my life over a few silly comments. Everyone complains about their in-laws." "Silly comments," I repeated slowly, the words sharp in the air. "Is that what you call 3 years of deliberate humiliation?" "I never humiliated you," she cried. "You made me feel worthless," I said. "You treated me like a servant in my own home. You convinced my son that I was a burden, that I was losing my mind, that I needed to be controlled." I set down the flowers and walked toward her. "You tried to erase me, Briella. You wanted me gone, so you could have the life you thought you deserved. I was just trying to help Marcus build a future for us. You have to understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You saw an older woman and assumed she was weak. You saw someone grieving her husband's death and decided she was broken. You moved into her home and treated her like she didn't exist." Briella wiped her nose with the back of her hand, a gesture that would have horrified her any other day. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "Do you want me to apologize? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. Can we move past this now?" I laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You think this is about hurt feelings?" I turned toward the window, where the garden outside glowed in the afternoon light. The roses my husband and I had planted 25 years ago were in full bloom, thriving despite years of neglect. 3 weeks ago," I said quietly, "you told Marcus you thought I was losing my memory. You suggested he should have me tested for cognitive decline." "I was concerned," she said weakly. "No," I said sharply. "You were setting the stage to have me declared incompetent so you could control my assets. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise." The silence between us was heavy, broken only by her uneven breathing. "Last month," I continued, "you called county social services and reported that an elderly woman was living in unsafe conditions. You wanted them to think I needed government assistance." Her face went white. "How did you—" "They called me directly," I said. "Eleanor R. Harrison, the woman whose name is on the deed, the bank accounts, the utilities, all of it. They wanted to confirm that I was safe and had the means to take care of myself." "I was trying to help," she whispered. "No, Briella, you were building a case, a trail of paperwork to prove I was unfit, so you and Marcus could take everything I built." I turned back to her, my voice steady. "Tell me, what was next in your plan? Power of attorney? Guardianship? Making my own son my legal keeper?" She broke completely then. Sobbing, her carefully curated composure shattered. "It wasn't like that," she cried. "I just thought you needed help." "The only help I needed," I said, "was protection from you." Just then, the front door opened. "Bree, are you home?" Marcus's voice echoed through the hallway. He stepped into the living room, tie loosened, his face tense. "Mom, what's going on? Briella called me crying, saying she got fired and that you were somehow involved." "Sit down, Marcus," I said quietly. "We need to have a conversation that's about 3 years overdue." He stayed standing, eyes darting between us. "I don't understand. How could you be involved in Briella's job? You don't even know where she works." I smiled faintly. "Oh, Marcus, I know exactly where she works." I paused. "Or rather," I said, "where she worked." "The Harrison Building," I said softly. 15th floor, Meridian Marketing, corner office, lovely view of the city." Marcus frowned. "How do you know that?" "Because I own the building, Marcus. I own the company that manages the property. I own the corporation that employs the management company. Every square inch of your wife's former workplace belongs to me." He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed, shaking his head. "That's ridiculous, Mom. You live off Dad's insurance and your pension. You can barely afford groceries." "I've never had trouble affording groceries," I said quietly. "I clip coupons because I was raised to respect money, not because I lack it." "This is insane," he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "If you had that kind of money, real money, why would you let us move in here? Why live like—" "Like what?" I interrupted. "Like someone you both treated as if she were already dead?" The words hit him like a blow. He sank into his father's old armchair, the same one he'd claimed when they moved in, and looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years: recognition. "I wanted to see who you really were," I said softly. "Both of you. I wanted to know what kind of man my son had become and what kind of woman he had married. I wanted to understand what would happen if I ever needed help, if I wasn't the strong woman who raised 3 children alone while building a business from nothing." "Business?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "Harrison Holdings," I said. "I started it 30 years ago with a small loan and your father's blessing. It's worth $47 million now. Every bit of it built while I was raising you and your sisters, and I kept it hidden because I learned long ago that people treat wealthy women very differently from ordinary mothers and grandmothers." Briella had stopped crying. She was staring at me, not with remorse but with fear, pure dawning fear at the scale of what she'd done. "Mom," Marcus began, but I lifted a hand. "I'm not finished," I said. "Briella's termination today," I continued evenly, "was just the beginning. When you spend years dismantling someone's dignity, when you make them feel worthless and unwanted, there are consequences, and those consequences don't end with a single job." I walked to my purse, took out a thick manila envelope, and set it on the coffee table between them. Briella's voice shook. "What's that?" "Your eviction notice," I said calmly. "Both of you. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live." Marcus's eyes widened. "You can't evict us. This is a family home. We're your family." I looked at him, really looked at him. No, Marcus. Family doesn't treat each other the way your wife has treated me. Family doesn't try to have their mother declared incompetent. Family doesn't make the woman who gave them life feel invisible. I picked up my vase of roses and walked toward the kitchen. I suggest you start looking for apartments. And, Briella, I paused, you might want to start with something you can afford on Marcus's salary alone, because as of today, your career in this city is over. Behind me, I heard her whisper, "What does that mean?" I didn't answer. She would find out soon enough. Because when you spend 30 years building relationships, earning respect, and gaining quiet power, your influence reaches far beyond a single building. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman. They were about to learn that they'd been living with a force of nature, one who had simply chosen to remain silent until now. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of phone calls, legal papers, and uneasy silence. Marcus and Briella stopped speaking to me directly, communicating only through short notes left on the kitchen counter or awkward encounters in the hallway. In my house, I'd reclaimed my home office, the room they'd turned into a storage space for Briella's gym equipment. Her yoga mats and handbags now sat boxed in the garage, exactly where they belonged. I was sitting at my desk one morning when my phone rang. "Mrs. Harrison," said the familiar voice on the other end. It was Janet Morrison, a longtime colleague who managed one of the city's top employment agencies. "I thought you'd want to know. Briella Richardson came in today asking for help with job placement." I leaned back in my leather chair, the same one I'd bought 20 years ago when Harrison Holdings earned its first $1 million. "I see," I said. "And how did that go?" Janet hesitated, a trace of amusement in her tone. "Well, it was interesting. She claims she was wrongfully terminated and is exploring legal options. She also mentioned that she has several connections who can vouch for her character." I smiled to myself. Briella still didn't understand how small this city really was, especially for someone like me, who had spent 3 decades building alliances and earning quiet loyalty. "And what did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her," Janet said smoothly, "that unfortunately we have no positions available that match her qualifications at this time, which is true, technically." "Technically?" I asked. "Yes," Janet continued. "After the calls I've received about her, most of our client companies have made it clear they won't be considering her for any openings." "Calls?" I repeated. "Oh, yes," she said lightly. "Quite a few." I smiled. It turns out that the world is very small, and memories are long. When you spend your life treating people with respect, they remember. And when you spend years treating others like they're beneath you, they remember that too. "Word travels fast in our industry," Janet said. "When someone is dismissed from a Harrison Holdings property, especially with a misconduct notation, people notice. Your company has a reputation for being extremely selective. Everyone assumes that if Eleanor Harrison terminates someone, there's always a reason." I hadn't even needed to make any calls. The business community in this city was smaller than most people realized, and my reputation had quietly traveled farther than gossip ever could. "She also asked if I knew anything about you," Janet added. She seemed confused about the connection between her mother-in-law and the CEO of Harrison Holdings. I told her I'd never heard of anyone by that name. "Thank you, Janet," I said. "I appreciate your discretion." "Of course," she replied, "though I have to admit I'm curious. Is this woman really related to you?" "Unfortunately, yes," I said, "but not for much longer." After hanging up, I turned to my computer. An email from my attorney, David Chen, was waiting, confirming that the eviction notice had been properly served. Marcus and Briella had exactly 12 days left to vacate the property. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. When I looked up, Marcus stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled shirt, the defeated posture of someone who'd been avoiding his reflection for days. "Mom," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" I gestured toward the chair across from my desk. He sat heavily, glancing around the office as if seeing it for the first time. The last time he'd been here, the room was cluttered with Briella's exercise mats and handbags. Now it had been restored, to mine, "I've been thinking about what you said," he began carefully. "About family, about how we've treated you." "Have you?" I asked. "I know Briella can be difficult," he said, hesitating, "and maybe we haven't been as considerate as we should have been." I removed my glasses and looked him straight in the eye. "Difficult?" I repeated. "Is that what you call it?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I mean, she has strong opinions. Maybe she came off as controlling." "Marcus," I said sharply, "stop." He blinked. "Stop what?" "Stop making excuses for her. Stop minimizing what she did. Stop pretending that 3 years of deliberate emotional cruelty were just strong opinions." His face flushed red. "She wasn't cruel, Mom. That's a really strong word for—" "For what?" I interrupted. "For convincing you that I was losing my mind? For calling county services to report me as an elderly woman in need of government aid? For throwing food on the floor and making me clean it up on my hands and knees in front of guests?" Each example hit him like a slap. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "For telling your business partners that you were worried about my mental state," I continued. "For whispering to our family doctor that I should be tested for dementia. For secretly researching nursing homes." He stared at me, pale. "How do you know all that?" "Because I've been paying attention," I said evenly. "While you both thought I was fading away, I was watching, listening, documenting every single thing she did to erase me from my own life." Silence hung in the air. "I didn't know she was doing all of that," he whispered. "But you're right. I knew about some of it. I saw things. I heard things. I thought you were okay with it. You never complained." "I was testing you, Marcus," I said softly. "I wanted to see what kind of man I had raised. A man who would defend his mother, or a man who would stay silent because it was easier." The words landed like a verdict. He lowered his head, shame washing over him. For a moment I saw my little boy again, the one who used to cry when he'd broken something precious. "She's my wife, Mom," he said weakly. "Marriage is about standing together, presenting a united front." "Marriage," I replied, "is not about sacrificing your mother's dignity to protect your spouse's pride. It's not about standing silently while someone destroys another person's self-worth because confrontation makes you uncomfortable." He swallowed hard. "What do you want me to do? Divorce her?" The question didn't surprise me, only how easily it came out. It was as if he'd already considered it. "I want you to make your own choices," I said calmly, "but I want you to make them with full awareness of who and what you're choosing." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it toward him. He frowned. "What's this?" "Evidence," I said. "Security footage, recorded phone conversations, copies of reports she filed, documentation of every attempt she made to have me declared incompetent or removed from my own home." He stared at the folder, afraid to touch it. "There are also financial records," I added. "Credit applications using my address and social security number." She assumed an elderly woman wouldn't notice or understand what it meant. His face went pale. That's identity theft." "Yes," I said quietly. "It is." He looked sick. "She's been saying she's your caregiver, researching power of attorney." "She was planning to take control of everything," I finished for him. He covered his face with both hands. "Mom, I had no idea." "I know you didn't," I said softly. "That's what hurts the most." He sat there in silence, the weight of truth pressing down on him. For once, there was nothing left to defend, nothing left to deny. After a long moment, I stood and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're still my son, Marcus," I said, "and I still love you, but love doesn't mean I'll let you hurt me again." He nodded slowly, tears filling his eyes. "What are you going to do?" I looked toward the window, at the city skyline that bore my name in steel letters across its tallest building. "I'm going to live," I said, "finally, and on my own terms." "You had no idea," I said quietly, "because you didn't want to know. It was easier to believe I was becoming a burden, easier to think that Briella was the responsible one managing a difficult situation. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden, the same garden where I had once spent peaceful mornings before they moved in, before I stopped feeling welcome in my own yard. Your wife, I continued, has been carefully working to take control of my life, my assets, and my future. She's been building a legal case to have me declared incompetent, and she's been using you as her accomplice, convincing you that I was failing, that I needed to be managed. Marcus swallowed hard. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to see what you would do, I said. I needed to know whether the son I raised would protect me or sacrifice me. The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel the weight of realization pressing down on him. Where is she now? I asked. Job hunting, he said bitterly. Or trying to. She's been rejected by every agency in the city. She keeps saying there's some kind of conspiracy against her, that someone's sabotaging her. There is, I said simply. His head snapped up. You. Me, I said. And the 30 years of professional relationships I've built, my reputation, my influence, and my complete inability to recommend anyone who tried to destroy my life. He looked stunned. Mom, that's vindictive. Is it? I asked softly. Or is it the natural consequence of her actions? When you spend years humiliating someone, especially someone with power, there are repercussions, Marcus. She thought she was dealing with a helpless old woman. She was actually dealing with one of the most influential business owners in this city. He picked up the folder of evidence again, hands trembling. What happens now? Now, I said, you decide who you want to be. You can keep defending someone who tried to erase your own mother, or you can finally understand that some choices can't be undone. He hesitated. And if I choose her? Then you'll be leaving with her in 12 days, when the eviction becomes final. You'll be starting over with someone who has no job, no references, and a documented history of elder abuse. His eyes filled with tears. I thought I was being a good husband. You were being a complicit one, I said gently. There's a difference. I turned back to my desk, refocusing on the computer screen. You have 12 days, Marcus. Choose wisely. He left my office, clutching the folder, the truth heavier than any suitcase he'd ever carry. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt something I'd thought I'd lost forever: complete control over my own life. 2 weeks later, moving day. The morning air was crisp, clear, the kind of autumn day that makes everything feel possible. I stood by my bedroom window, coffee in hand, and watched the moving truck pull into the driveway. Marcus and Briella had found a small apartment across town, the only one that would take them after landlord, coincidentally, decided they weren't a good fit. I'd been up since dawn, not from worry, from anticipation. Today marked the end of the most painful chapter of my life, and the beginning of something new. Living in my own home, without fear, without tiptoeing, without pretending to be less than I am. The movers worked quickly, loading boxes and furniture that had slowly invaded my space over the past 3 years. I watched her designer clothes, her exercise equipment, her expensive kitchen gadgets disappear one by one. With every item that left the house, it felt a little easier to breathe. Briella hadn't spoken to me since our confrontation. She moved through the house like a shadow, hollow, mechanical, a ghost of the confident woman she'd once been. Marcus was different. Since reading the folder, he'd been trying to talk, to apologize, to fix what couldn't be fixed. But some things can't be mended with words, and some trust can't be rebuilt with regret. Mom. I turned. Marcus stood in the living room doorway, watching as the movers carried out the last few boxes. He looked older, not by years, but by consequence. I know I don't have the right to ask this, he said quietly, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for what I let happen to you in your own home. I nodded slowly. I know you are, Marcus. Is there any way? he asked, voice breaking. Any possibility that you could forgive me? I looked at him, really looked at him. And in that moment, I saw all the versions of him that had led here. The little boy who used to pick dandelions for me, the teenager who cried after his first heartbreak, the young man who used to call every Sunday just to check in. For a moment, I saw my son. I'll always love you, I said softly, but forgiveness takes time, and trust takes even longer. He nodded, tears falling silently. I understand. As the moving truck pulled away, I turned back to the window. The garden outside glowed in the afternoon sun. The same roses my husband and I planted 25 years ago now blooming brighter than ever. Peace. For the first time in years, that's what I felt. Not revenge, not anger, just peace, born from finally standing up, reclaiming what was mine, and remembering who I had always been. I can forgive you, Marcus, I said softly. In time I probably will, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. He looked up, eyes red. Then, what does it mean? It means that someday we might have a relationship again, I replied, but it will be a different relationship, with boundaries, and it will require you to prove that you've learned from this. He nodded, struggling to hold back tears. And Briella? What about her? She's my wife. She's destroyed, Mom. She can't find work. We can barely afford the apartment. She knows she made mistakes, but the punishment seems so extreme. For systematically trying to destroy my life? I cut in sharply. For identity theft? For 3 years of psychological manipulation designed to make me doubt my own sanity? He swallowed hard. When you put it like that... That's exactly what it was, Marcus, I said, and the fact that you're still trying to protect her from the consequences tells me you haven't learned anything at all. The words hit him like a physical blow. She's not the victim here, I continued, my voice steady. I am, and the fact that her life is falling apart now doesn't erase what she did. It's not cruelty, it's justice. Through the window, I saw Briella sitting in their car, staring blankly ahead. For just a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. She'd lost everything. Her job, her reputation, her comfort. But then, I remembered the sound of that dinner plate hitting the floor, the sting of humiliation as I crawled on my hands and knees to clean her mess while guests watched in silence. And I remembered the lies, the manipulation, the campaign to convince everyone that I was losing my mind. No. I had spent too many years feeling sorry for people who hurt me. I was done confusing kindness with weakness. Will you at least consider giving her a second chance? Marcus asked desperately. People can change. People can learn. Can they? I asked quietly. Because 2 weeks ago, after I fired her and revealed who I truly was, she didn't come to me with an apology. She went to employment agencies claiming wrongful termination. She contacted a lawyer. She told anyone who would listen that I was a bitter old woman jealous of her success. Marcus's face went pale. I didn't know she was doing that. Of course you didn't, I said, because she's still lying, still manipulating, still trying to control the story. The only difference now is that she no longer has any power over me. Outside, the rumble of the moving truck filled the silence. Our conversation and our time together was almost over. I love you, Mom, he said quietly. Despite everything, despite how badly I failed you, I love you. I love you too, Marcus, I said gently, and maybe someday that will be enough to rebuild something between us. But not today. And not while you're still married to someone who tried to destroy me. He nodded slowly. The weight of understanding and loss finally settled in his eyes. If I made different choices about my marriage, he asked, voice trembling, would that change things between us? I sighed. Marcus, you're a grown man. You have to make your own choices about your life, your marriage, and your future, but you also have to live with the consequences. And if I choose her? Then you're choosing to stay with someone who has already shown you who she is, I said firmly. someone who preyed on the vulnerable and justified it as care. That's your decision to make, but it's also mine to decide how I respond to it. He was crying openly now, his composure gone, and for the briefest moment I felt the old instinct, the one every mother knows, to comfort, to make it better, to absorb his pain, but I was done sacrificing myself for other people's comfort. "The truck is ready," he said finally, wiping his eyes. "Yes," I said. "You should go." He hesitated at the door. "Will you call me someday?" "Maybe," I said softly, "when you've figured out who you want to be." After they left, silence filled the house, deep and absolute. For the first time in 3 years, it felt like mine again. I walked through each room, reclaiming spaces that had slowly been taken from me. I moved the furniture back where it belonged, opened curtains that had been kept closed for Briella's afternoon naps. In the kitchen, I brewed tea and sat at the same table where I'd once been humiliated. The faint stain on the hardwood floor was still there, a small, stubborn reminder of how low I'd once allowed myself to be brought. Tomorrow, I would have the floors refinished. Tonight, I would simply sit and remember what peace felt like. As the sun began to set, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my daughter, Sarah. "Mom," she said, "Marcus called me. He told me everything. Why didn't you tell us what was happening? Why didn't you ask for help?" I smiled faintly, sinking back into my chair. "Because I didn't need help, sweetheart. I needed to see who people really were when they thought I was powerless." "But you suffered for 3 years," she said softly. "You let them treat you terribly when you could have stopped it." "Yes," I said, "and in doing so, I learned something priceless about my son, about his wife, and about how people behave when they believe they have power over the vulnerable." She was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do now?" I looked around my kitchen, my home, and smiled. "I'm going to live, Sarah. I'm going to remember who I was before I started believing that my worth depended on anyone else's opinion." "Are you okay? Really okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm free." After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked out to the garden. The roses were blooming, strong and resilient, despite 3 years of neglect. They had survived without my care, just as I had survived without anyone's respect. Tomorrow, I would return to my office full-time, rebuild connections, reclaim my place. But tonight, I would sit in my garden and remember what it felt like to be Eleanor Harrison again. Not Marcus's mother, not the quiet woman in the corner, not the convenient target for someone else's cruelty. Just me, successful, respected, unapologetically strong, and finally, truly at peace. As the first stars appeared above, I raised my glass in a silent toast, not to revenge, not even to victory, but to something far greater, the rediscovery of my own worth. Because some people spend their entire lives learning to stand up for themselves. At 60 years old, I finally remembered how to stand up for the woman I had always been. And that power, that peace, that freedom, no one could ever take from me again.